with your kids, there we go, in which you don't want to have them. They're uncomfortable, they're awkward at best, but you feel like this is important enough that I'm going to do my best to talk about things that are difficult for me to say and for them to hear. Probably the best example of this as a parent is the birds and the bees conversation. And you can read books, and you can pray, and you could walk as carefully into that as possible, but the whole time you're like, what if they start asking questions? What am I supposed to do about that? Well, today is one of those conversations. As a minister, as a preacher of the gospel of Christ, there are times where you get into conversations, if you will, that really you don't want to have. But when you preach through books of the Bible or you preach through sections of Scripture, you end up coming to a place where you're like, if I could choose my different topics, this wouldn't be one of them. Like, my grandma and my mom were in church today. My in-laws, my son are in church now. So when you have the birds and bees conversation from the stage, like when Jesus says adultery's bad, but watch out for lust, and then you have to unpack that. There's no joy in that for me. I prayed a lot this week. Next week we're talking about divorce. I'm praying a lot already for that one, because that's not a sermon you want to preach either. But the reality is, like if you're a parent talking to your kids, who better than your kids to hear from than you? And so we could talk about things from a Christian standpoint. Who better for us to hear than the words of Jesus and to read from his word? So that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to talk about intimacy from a Christian perspective. So everybody just buckle up, tighten that seatbelt up as much as you can, because the train is leaving the station. And the bottom line is, you're going to hear about it a lot anyway. Let's hear about what Jesus has to say about it. Now here's the thing, is that in our culture, we view sex in three different ways. Sex is a god, it's gross, it's a gift. So in our culture, you don't have to look very far to realize that sex has become a god that we worship. Sex and sexuality as a whole. So you look at like what people search for on the internet. Sex is the number one searched word. There is not really a close second. 90% of the songs that are on the Billboard charts at any given time have intimacy as one of the themes of the song, and they're not usually talking about between a husband and a wife, faithful intimacy. It's usually promiscuity. In fact, I could read you some of the song lyrics that are out there, but like I'd probably get fired because of how inappropriate they are. Whenever you think about the pornography industry, how much money is to be made, you think about companies like Google, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, eBay, and Yahoo. The porn industry has more revenue going to it than all of those combined. That's insane to me. I come home and every other day there's an Amazon Prime box on my front door. I have bought Amazon stock just to get a little bit of that money back in some way. You think about how much money is made with all of these big industries. In fact, you look at the four major sports. You talk about, football, baseball, basketball, and hockey. The porn industry makes more money than those four entities combined. It has contributed to human trafficking, which is rampant not only in the world, but in particular in our country. And next weekend, Super Bowl Sunday, is one of the biggest weekends for human trafficking. If you were to watch TV, how many commercials are you going to see? They're trying to sell toothpaste, and they're using sexuality to sell toothpaste. 2 out of every shows that you watch are going to have intimacy, not just like little blurbs of it, but as part of the key themes. And we wonder, when we watch shows and movies and listen to music that glorify promiscuity, not being faithful to your spouse, we wonder why marriages end in divorce. We wonder why people have affairs. And the funny thing is, when they do, we look at them aghast. How could you do this? Well, it's because you're feeding your mind all of this stuff. So sex has become a god that we worship. We are told, everything's fluid. whatever your heart desires, it's the way that you are, and it's a good thing, and it should be enjoyed, and the biggest goal in life is to be fulfilled in that capacity, not recognizing all the dangers that are associated with it. So you can see it as a God. Everyone in culture does, unless you have a Christian perspective. Now, sometimes throughout church history, it's been seen as a gross, untouchable, untalked about thing. You can look throughout history, it's like culture talks so much about it, the church isn't going to talk about it at all, which maybe leads kids to believe that it's not something that's supposed to happen. In church history, there have been different moments and seasons where it's been seen as the necessary evil. It's only used for procreation. That's why, not to pick on the Catholic Church, but when you look at priests and nuns, their heart and devotion is to the church. They can't be married because that in some way brings about some impurity. If you just have a marriage, husband and wife, enjoying one another, they're like, no, you can't have that. That makes you dirty in some way. But the reality is, sex is a gift. It's created by God. He didn't do it by accident. He was up there and he made Adam in his own image. And he says, it's not good for man to be alone. So then he has Adam name all the animals so Adam could realize, like, there's nobody who fits with me. There's no one I can have companionship with. And God's like, I've got a great idea. And the angels are like, what? He's like, you're not going to get it. But when you see it, you're going to be jealous. And he makes woman, and he creates something to bless mankind with. So there are a lot of things that we're given that are good that we turn into bad and use them in horrific, dangerous ways. Just an example outside of what we're talking about. Think about fire. When I lived in St. Louis, I had a fireplace. I love that fireplace, a wood-burning fireplace. Every year, before fire season came, I would inspect the chimney, and I'd get on my roof, and I'd take everything off, and I'd look down, I'd shine a flashlight, and I'd run a chimney sweep up and down, because I didn't want a chimney fire. Like, you got to respect fire. It's a great gift. I love that wood-burning fireplace, but there's high risk there. If you have that thing burning with your doors open, and you hear pop, pop, and you were looking around your carpet, like, you could have a little ember come out and set things ablaze just like that. So fire is to be enjoyed within its proper context. If you came over to my house when I have a fire going, you could say, man, I love fires. Can we get a fire pit and put it in the corner of your dining room? Because I want to look out this window and sit in this chair and drink my coffee and read a book. Can we just move the fire over here? It's like, no. We can't move the fire because that's dangerous and you're going to burn my house down. What kind of crazy pills have you been taking? It's the same with intimacy. Like, it is to be enjoyed. It's a great gift, but only in its proper context. Anybody else sweating bullets right now, like to where this message is going to go? Just me? All right, well, here we go. Let's walk through it together. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 to 30. We're going to walk through the passage like we've been doing all these weeks, and then we're going to start back up at the top and then try to figure out, okay, what is Jesus' advice when he talks about not just moral purity or purity in general, but in particular, sexual purity. Here's what he says. You've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. So I thought about, for a great illustration, to buy everybody an eye patch. You just walk around with your right eye covered, and then like you had to pull your right hand up in your sleeve. Just go through life a week walking around like that. Your friends ask you what's going on. Hey, have you read Matthew 5, 27 to 30? It's just an experiment I'm trying for the week. Because Jesus takes sin seriously. I almost preached the sermon with an eye patch, but I thought, there's no coming, you would not be able to unsee that, and there'd be no coming back from it. But here's how he begins. Don't commit adultery. And the Jews are like, yeah, we've heard that before. Now, they took marriage very seriously. They took infidelity very seriously. Interestingly enough, other cultures around them, particularly the Greeks and the Romans, did not view faithfulness in marriage as a big deal. They did as far as the wife was concerned, but not the husband. You know the expression, boys will be boys. That started way back in the Greco-Roman empires. And so the way it would work is you would marry somebody. It was a political alliance of sorts. Of course, I'm talking about people who were wealthy. And you would bring two families together, and you would have offspring that would inherit wealth from both families. But then the husband almost always had something on the side if he was wealthy enough to. If you were lower middle class or lower class, you wouldn't have the opportunity to do this. But literally in this time period, and I'm not trying to be gross or inappropriate, I'm just telling you the way it was. You would purchase, usually these wealthy men would purchase young boys, keep them in their house, and perform grotesque acts with them so that they could have pleasure. Now, the interesting thing to me is this is what happens in a pre-Christian society. And as our culture becomes increasingly more post-Christian, where do you see us heading as it relates to our children? Have you seen on the news different public libraries having reading hour with a drag queen? You show up to a public library, there's a man dressed up as a woman, and he reads a children's story to you. Just saw, I don't know if it was within the last week or two, there was a zoo that had a family drag queen night, which is a contradiction of terms, by the way. And so, you can see videos of these little kids, some of them could barely walk, walking up with dollar bills, putting them in the G-string of a grown man dressed as a woman. Why would they do this? Because they're trying to sexualize our children. Because the way things were in a pre-Christian world are the way that they're going to become in a post-Christian world. I think it's all being done on purpose. It's all being done intentionally with great strategy. They're trying to rob the innocence of our children, and pedophilia will eventually become just another fetish and just another norm. Now you could say, Doug, what are you, some kind of a conspiracy theorist? No, I'm a historian. I see the way the world was, and I see where we're going. And I can see those two things matching up. The problem is, in our world today, I'm the problem. A white middle-aged man, a conservative Christian living in the Midwest. I am the face of terror. Get a good look at this face. This is the problem of America, because I call a spade and want to protect our children. I've got land that I'm purchasing in Alaska. I'm moving there soon. You all can go with me, okay? We'll have our own compound. Because I don't know how much longer we have of life like this. Are you depressed yet? Because I was thinking about it all week. Nonetheless, adultery in the Jewish culture, it was wrong for men and it was wrong for women. But notice how Jesus says it. He says, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has committed adultery with her in his heart. So he uses the third person singular pronoun here to say, hey, this is typically a bigger problem for men, and it is. You can look at all the stats. You can look at all of the people who are molesting kids, the people who are trafficking. It's usually men. And if Jesus talks about lust in their context, how would he talk about it in ours? The word look, lustfully, look is a longing gaze. It's not noticing someone's beauty. It's looking and longing and undressing them with your eyes and all the things that go along with lust. It's the same idea when Lot and his family were leaving Sodom and Gomorrah. Do you remember that story? Genesis 19 rather. It's crazy. Read it. Lot's wife gets turned into a pillar of salt because the angel said, we're about to destroy the city. Do not look back. And she looked back. Now, it wasn't, the word for look there isn't like, oh my goodness, what's happening? And then she turned into a pillar. It was Sodom and Gomorrah. It was a great place to live. I enjoy the things that happened there. As grotesque and evil as they were in God's eyes, it was really a good place to raise your children. Oh, why is it being destroyed? And she looked back longingly towards the city, and that's what caused her to be turned into a pillar of salt. And so Jesus is like, it's not just noticing beauty, it's noticing beauty and then going further with your thoughts, thinking in a context that you should only think about in terms of your wife, or if you're a woman, your husband. Now, in our world today, I don't think that we necessarily lust anymore, but the potential and the door that's open with technology takes us to a worse place so much quicker. You can read different psychologists and sociologists, even people who aren't Jesus people, when they talk about the dangers of pornography, the addiction level that it causes in your brain, the spike of dopamine and different hormones that it brings about, is in between methamphetamine, which has a 100% addiction rate, and heroin, the second most addictive drug, which is in the 80 percentile. It's like it causes you to see it. It causes a spike. And then every time that you see it after that, the spike isn't as strong. And so you keep looking at more and more grotesque versions of intimacy on the internet. 25 years ago, when somebody got a hold of a magazine, it caused a different response in your brain. Videos take it to a whole nother level. And there is no limit to the depravity that can be viewed online. So when he talks about lust to them, they didn't have magazines. They didn't have smartphones. Like, their ability to lust was restricted to looking at a person and then imagining things. Now you can start imagining things and then bring about all of the uses of technology along with it. And it warps your brain in all kinds of sick and dangerous ways. And the younger you are that you view it, the worse it will be as you continue to get older. But I'm an equal opportunity offender. Men, you got to watch out for that. Ladies, there are certain books that are popular that people read. They do it so casually. The only one that I know of is 50 Shades of Grey, not because I've read it, but because it was plastered all over the place at one time. That leads you down the same path. Men and women are different. Men are visual. Women, you need relationships, you need romance, you need all that stuff. And you get it from those books, which changes the way that you view intimacy as well. I have a Facebook friend. She posted, I just finished, it was like a few books. I just finished these books. I can't wait until, and I was looking at the covers and I'm like, this ain't good. Maybe the Bible, the Bible, that's the book for me. Have you heard of that one? Because the path you're going down is going to lead you to hurt and heartache and issues with intimacy. You have taken the fire out of the fireplace, you've put it in the living room, and you're trying to burn your house down before it even gets built, because she's not even married yet. Dangerous, dangerous stuff. If you've got books like that, and you need to burn them immediately. If you've got the ability to go to those websites, you need to get checks on your phone and content blockers and restrictions immediately. As soon as you get to your car, hand your wife your phone, let her set something up. Because your marriage is too precious to leave to chance. Or you can take the advice of Jesus. What does he say? Well, if your right eye causes you to sin, you ever gouged out an eye before? You ever done a European mount before? It doesn't just pop out as easy as you'd think. There's a lot of digging and twisting, and nobody's eaten lately, have they? Like, it's nasty. That's what I think about when Jesus says, gouge out your eye and throw it away. Or if your right hand causes you to sin. Can you imagine getting a hacksaw and just going through the pain? And then, all right, we're good. Blood shooting out of your hand. Like, what is Jesus saying here? He's saying you need to deal as harshly with your sin as possible. And no matter what you do to deal with your sin, you think, boy, I've really, maybe I'm doing too much. He's like, do you still have hands and eyeballs? Yes? Then you've not gone too far. You've not done too much. When we think about sin, we think of it as like, it's just something that we're going to always live with. It's always going to be a part of our lives. Jesus saves us from our sin, and he loves us unconditionally. And as long as I don't do too much, that's bad. It's okay. Think of it like a headache. When you have a headache, it's like everybody gets headache. Headaches happen sometime. When I get a headache, I'm going to take an Advil or an ibuprofen or whatever. Or, if it's a bad headache, I may take an Excedrin. That's not the way Jesus describes sin here. It's not like a headache. It's like cancer. You know what you do when you have cancer? You take chemo. You take radiation. We all know people who've had cancer. It's horrific. It's horrendous. I've heard so many people when they describe cancer, they say, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. That's how bad it is. That's how bad the treatments to get rid of cancer are. And what we do with cancer is we zero in on one part of the body. And you shoot it with chemo, you shoot it with radiation, and you know you're going to destroy good cells as well. But it's better than dying of cancer. It's exactly what Jesus says. Hey, listen, I know cutting off your hand, that sounds horrific. You throw it away. But it's better for you to have your body handless than for it to go to hell. And so, when you have to figure out, okay, what treatments are we going to do? The doctor's going to say, look, this is going to be horrific. It's going to be horrible. The treatments are going to do horrible things to your body, but this is what gives you a chance to live. It's better to go through the treatments and survive than to let the cancer just rip away at your body. So when we think about all that this entails, Jesus is like, do whatever you possibly can to remove sin from your life. And if you've thought of something and think, surely not that, does it fall short of cutting off hands and gouging out eyes? If the answer is yes, then you haven't gone far enough yet. Or at the very least, you haven't gone too far. The Apostle Paul, he piggybacks on this whole idea. And he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, I'm going to cover this really quickly. He says, flee from sexual immorality. Just run away from it. Get away from it as quick as you can. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. It is different. Sexual sin. When you talk about murder, you talk about stealing, you talk about other stuff, that is outside your body. And it could be bad, but sexual sin is different because it affects your body in tremendous ways. And he's like, that's a big deal. Why, Paul? Well, don't you know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you've received from God? You are not your own. You don't belong to you anymore. Your body's not yours. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. So when he says your body's a temple of the Holy Spirit, when we become Jesus followers, Holy Spirit lives inside of us. We don't have an idea of what temples are like. We don't know how sacred temples are. In fact, in our culture, nothing is sacred anymore. But in their culture, they understood the importance of temples. You don't just casually walk into the temple area. The Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, with the Old Testament temple, that's where God's presence dwelt. You didn't just walk in there flippantly or casually. You treated it with the utmost respect. High priest went in there one time a year to make sacrifices, and they tied a rope around his leg so if he dropped dead, they wouldn't have to go in after him. They could pull him out. That's how they saw the temple of God. And Paul's borrowing that language. He says, your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. It is more precious than what you could ever imagine. And when you sin sexually, you sin against that temple. You desecrate the temple. You bring evil into that which is pure. So something's inside of us that changes the way God sees us. Like, if you held me at gunpoint and said, I want your wallet. I don't ever have my wallet with me. And I start to hand you my wallet. And you're like, no, I don't want the money. I don't want the credit cards. I don't want the identification. I just want the wallet. The wallet that I have is not, it was $10 at Walmart, okay? Like, it's not a valuable wallet. It's what's inside it that makes it valuable to me. It's the same way. Like, there's nothing special about your body, the skin and the flesh and the tendons and ligaments, all that stuff. There's nothing holy about that. It's that God lives inside of you that changes the dynamics of who you and I are. And he says, you're so valuable. You were bought at a price. You no longer belong to you. And depending on what, someone pays for something or who owned it determines its value. When I was in high school, I bought some wood baseball bats. I bought them on, this was a website called batwarehouse.com. I bought them for $25 each. They were A-Rod models. Remember those, Shannon? The black ones? You don't? Well, that's just because we were dating then when I bought them. Maybe she doesn't remember them because I broke them. Because apparently I don't know how to swing a wooden bat correctly. And I broke both of them, which is okay. What if I had a bat that was used by Pujols in a game and signed by him? Like, what if you had a bat of his 500, 600, whatever home run? You gonna take that outside in the yard? Hey, throw a couple to me. Nope. That thing's in a glass case with lasers shooting through the room that it's in, so if someone tries to get it, like, that thing's valuable now. But Doug, it's just a wooden bat with Louisville Slugger written. Like, who cares? You broke 2 of those. It changes based on who used it or owned it before. So God's like, you were bought at a price. You don't determine your value or the value of someone else. I've determined it. I sent Jesus to die. That's the price that I purchased humanity with. So you are a temple of the Holy Spirit. And even a person who's not, they were created in my image and I bought them with a price. So change the way that you see, treat, talk about, and think about one another. Here's how I want to end. I'm going to talk about guardrails. Guardrails exist on roads to keep you from driving into an area and hurting yourself or other vehicles. And guardrails always exist well within the parameters of, we're about to crash. So I live north of town. I pass 2 sections of guardrails. One going up the hill, going from Ritchie to Woodlawn Road. There's a drop-off on each side. There are guardrails there. Why would they do that? Well, if one person drove off and hurt themselves, they're going to put up guardrails. The second one's when you get to the interstate. Guardrails there as well. So they put guardrails up so that if you're driving and you're texting or changing your radio or whatever, and you lose control or you start to drift, you hit the guardrail, which is minimal compared to the damage of rolling end over end down the cliff. So guardrails exist not only on the road to keep your vehicle where it's supposed to be, they exist in our lives to keep us on the straight and narrow and where we're supposed to be as well. Do you have guardrails in place to keep yourself from accidentally stumbling into areas that you shouldn't stumble into? Let me talk about 2 real quick. The first one is technology. So I have a content restrictor on my phone. In fact, just in the last couple days, I was trying to read an article about the weather balloon that was over and the multiple balloons over our country, and I got blocked. The content blocker kept me from reading an article on, I don't even know who wrote it. I think it was the Daily Wire. I was like, why is this blocking me? This is important information I need to know. But do you know what else it blocks? Stuff I shouldn't be seeing. Websites I shouldn't go to. So I will take the inconvenience and the frustration of it sometimes blocking me from things that are innocent for me to see, as long as it blocks me from things that I should not be looking at. It's a guardrail that has been put in place. And if you don't have if you don't have stuff put in place for you, then you're driving with no hands, not looking at the road, and just hoping that you're going to end up arriving at your destination. And let me say this for parents. If you don't have blocks or something on the devices of your children, you're playing with fire, man. Like, you're taking their vulnerability and their innocence and you're giving it to the world and saying, okay, please protect the hearts and minds of my children, and they can't wait to get at them. Now, I know your child is sweet. They would never do anything like that. I know. But I know your kids' friends, and they're knuckleheads. All of them are. And they got older brothers and sisters who are knuckleheads as well. And it just takes one knucklehead to send the link to a website. And kids are curious by nature. And they're going to see something, and they're going to click and keep looking and keep going because they have not been exposed to that type of world. So if you don't have stuff in place on your devices to keep you from stumbling where you shouldn't go, then you're going to end up driving off a cliff. And the world, man, they are so strategic about what they do. I was talking to my wife about a watch. I saw somebody had a watch, and I thought, man, that's a really cool watch. I'm on Instagram. Every third post is about watches. I was like, I've not searched watch. I just made a comment about a watch. Joke's on them, though. I'm scrolling through, it's like $500 for a watch. I'm like, they don't know who they're advertising to. $500 for a watch? I'll go to Walmart and pay $15 maybe, if it's a good deal, but not $500. Of course, now I'm going to get like $10 watches now that I've said that, right? But like, you search for something, you talk about something, boom, it's there. And if you don't have guardrails in a moment of weakness, in a moment of stress, you might click something you shouldn't click and be watching something you shouldn't watch. So protect and guard your heart. Number 2, I've got the Billy Graham rule. Billy Graham famously was the guy who said, I'm not going to ride in a car with, go out to eat with, or ever be alone with a woman that I'm not related to. He was so extreme about this, like if he was somewhere on an elevator and ding, the door's open and a woman walked on, he would just walk off. He wasn't going to be alone with anybody under any circumstance. And in that context, he's like, I don't want people seeing me and a woman just get off by ourselves, because that's going to raise some questions. So, like, he would just get off, like, I'm on the 18th floor, I need to be on the ground, so I guess I'm just going to hang out for a little bit and wait for another elevator to come. Like, it was an inconvenience, but he's like, I'm going to put up some serious guardrails, because he knows how the enemy's going to attack. So you need to be careful. That's a rule for me. I'm not going to go on a trip with, go out to eat with, meet alone with a woman. I take the Billy Graham rule. Now, with my job, easy for me to do that. You may say, well, Doug, I'm going to end up traveling with somebody, and it doesn't always work out that way, and I can't say I'm not going to do that. Well, just be really smart and careful if you can't apply the Billy Graham rule to the letter of the law. And I'll say this, you should not be friends, that includes good friends, best friends, or even just kind of friends, with a member of the opposite sex in which you're touching base with them, texting them, calling them just to have a chat, meeting them for coffee, just the two of you. Don't be doing that. You've taken the fire out of the fireplace, you put it in the middle of the living room. There's no good that comes from that. None, nunca, zero. That's about the extent of the languages of me saying no or nothing. Okay? Nothing good comes from that. Well, Doug, they're just my friend. Nothing's going to happen. Nothing has happened. To say nothing's going to happen, you got some crystal ball that is telling you that it's not going to, you're going to 8 ball. Is anything ever going to happen between us? Common sense, conventional wisdom, all of it says, do not do it under any circumstance. And I hope some of you feel really uncomfortable at the moment, because if you're doing it, you need to stop. Just say, hey, I'm not going to text you anymore. Why? Because my pastor's going to come get me. He's going to gouge out my eye and cut off my hands. He told me during the message today. Don't confide in somebody in the opposite sex. Talk about your marriage, how things are struggling, how you're really, dealing with some stuff, and they're going to come and help. No. God, be smarter than that. Because here's the reality. And I got stuff on my phone that protects me. I follow the Billy Graham rule. And you're like, what, Doug, you don't trust yourself? Not really. There's a general rule that I live by. And if I ever talk to any of the youth about dating, here's what I say. Men are pigs. Men are pigs. And if you go through life just assuming all men are pigs, you'll be in a much better place. So I think all men are pigs. I'm going to put myself in that category and then put up guardrails to keep myself from acting like a pig. Because here's what I've had to do. Too many times, way too many times in my short ministerial career, I've had to sit down with couples that have crossed the guardrails, and they're trying to figure out what divorce looks like for them. I've had to sit in the room while parents tell kids. They asked me to be there. I didn't want to be there, but I was trying to support everybody involved. There are kids yelling and screaming, and they storm out, and then the parents are fighting, and I have to act like a referee in that moment. It's like just rip my heart out and stomp on it. So I've seen it too many times. And here's what I said a long time ago. It ain't going to be me. That's never going to be me. I'm not going to let that happen. My marriage is too worth it. I love my kids too much. I'm not going to sit there and have to have a conversation with my wife and kids about how I'm a pig and I acted like an idiot and drove outside the guardrails. It's not happening in my house. I'll help you when it happens in yours, and I'll love you through it, And I'll take you every step of the way because I know how hurtful and painful it is because I've seen it happen too many times, but it ain't happening with me. Is it going to happen with you? Guess who gets to decide that? You do. So put up guardrails. Stay inside the lines. Your marriage and your family, they are worth it. And I promise you this, and I can't promise you very many things, but I promise you this. If you put up guardrails and you go even stricter than I've gone, and you're like, the Billy Graham rule, I'm going to come up with an even harder and stricter rule than that, and I'm going to put even more stuff on my phone. I promise you, you will not regret it. But the opposite may not be true. What are you willing to give up to protect what is most important and precious to you? This is the call that Jesus has given to us. These are the tools that he's armed us with so that we can protect our hearts and our minds, protect our marriages, protect our families. It ain't going to be easy. It's not always going to be convenient, but I can promise you it's always going to be worth it. Father,